hereby call this meeting of Norwood City Council to order. Please rise for the prayer, pledge of allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in this council chamber, we pray for thy divine guidance, that we may do all things well, according to thy holy will. Amen. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Williams, please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel.
Here.
Mr. Gabbard.
Here.
Mr. Geraci.
Here.
Mr. Kelch.
Here.
Mr. DiNardo.
Here.
Mr. Thompson.
Here.
Mr. Braden.
Here.
All members present. Item E, amendment of agenda. We don't have any amendments this evening. Moving on to item F, minutes of previous meeting, August 11th, 2020, August 25th, 2020, and September 8th, 2020. Mr. Geraci.
Make a motion to accept them.
Motion by Mr. Geraci. Do I have a second? Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting, aye, the motion passes. Moving on to item H. This evening, we have Chief of Police Bill Kramer. Chief Kramer, if you come forward.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to come out tonight. I'm here tonight to present two of our officers with our life-saving award. And our life-saving award is just what it says it is. It's an award for officers when they save somebody's life. Just a little backstory before I get into kind of specifics, I think, which makes this even more impressive, is one of the officers involved is a brand new officer, just graduated from the academy. So I think that speaks really highly to the type of people we hire. And he was with his training officer. I think that speaks very highly to his training officer that they took the action that they did. So what happened is on August 29th, Officer Robert Town, who is the new officer who was in the FTO phase, and his training officer, Brian Hoffman, were patrolling, and they noticed a man who appeared to be passed out. They right away called for medics and got out to help. Police officer Brian Hoffman determined that the person was not breathing and lowered him to his back. And Officer Robert Town, who is also trained in, not just trained in CPR, but is an instructor in CPR, began giving chest compressions to the person. He performed the compressions until he heard faint breathing. Officer Hoffman was assisting with trying to hear the vitals. And when he stopped breathing again, and once again, Officer Robert Town began chest compressions. He noticed that the person's mouth began to move and the purple color in his face and extremities began to subside and his skin color returned to normal. At that point, they turned the person over to the medics, and the medics confirmed he was breathing and had a strong pulse at that time. Once the medics had him, he again lost his pulse. They gave him a Narcan, intubated him, and started CPR again. At the end of the day, he did survive, was taken to the hospital, but the supervisor that was working that night believed that these officers deserved the life-saving award, and I also agree. So if Robert Town and Brian Hoffman would come forward to receive these awards. Congratulations. All right.
Thank you, Chief Kramer. Continuing on with requests to address council. When I call your name, please come to the podium, state your name and address, and you will have 5 minutes to speak. The first name that I have is Matt Latchell. Mr. Latchell?
Hi, my name is Matt Latcha. I live at 1756 Cortland Avenue, and I'm here to speak in support of ordinances for murals here in Norwood. Many of the arguments that I've heard presented to you all from citizens have had to do with fears and anxieties about the content of the murals. Some people have said that because of the First Amendment protections, murals cannot be controlled in any way. But I just wanted to remind us all that obscenity is not a covered free speech. It's not protected by free speech based on a lot of history in Supreme Court. There's a lot of things in our everyday life that have the potential to be misused. For instance, I can't control the behavior of other drivers on the street. They can do whatever they want. However, there are laws and governing bodies in place to control that behavior. Murals in Norwood will be no different with the art board and other avenues for control and support for murals. And so I want to urge you all to look into the possibility of approving murals in residential and commercial spaces to continue to help Norwood grow in beauty and in prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you. Next request to address council, Lyric Morris Latchell.
Hi, my name is Lyric Morris Latcha, and I live and work here in Norwood, and I'm the artist who was hired in 2019 by Lydia's House to work on a proposed mural design for 4502 Carter Avenue. They wanted a mural that would uplift and honor the women and children transitioning out of homelessness who live in that building, many of whom I know personally. So it was an honor to work on this mural, and I worked with them to develop imagery of a pregnant woman surrounded by a flourish of foliage and flowers. I'm sure that many people listening have seen this mural, in part because it was recently called out publicly here in Council as well for an accidental phallic shape made by a flower in the background. First of all, on a technical note, I did just want to say that there is an image of the corner of this mural that's circulated widely on Facebook, and I think that this is the image most people have seen. And this image is a photograph that someone took of a poor quality printout of the mural. And in this printout, the colors are very faded, and it does kind of look like this image is just very starkly there on the wall. But I wanted to say that it's within the context of a flower with intricate line work drawn around it, that in the full image of the mural you can see much more. So I know that these printouts are not going to be very useful in this context, but I was hoping maybe someone could help me get them on Facebook. I'm not a Facebook user. So this is the full mural image. If we are to zoom in on this small purple square, this was earlier in the design process, what this square looked like. You can see it's a large flower outlined in white. And then the woman who I was collaborating with asked me to add in some fields of color. So I went in and did that across the mural. And this is what that portion of the mural looked like after those fields of color were added. So you can see a bit more here than in the circulated image, that it is within the context of a larger decorative flower there. I just thought that would be helpful to share for context for everyone who might be confused around the conversation that's been happening. All right, so that being said, in some senses, the rumors are kind of true. I drew a flower, and it kind of looks like a penis. I looked back through my files today, and I realized that I drew 34 full-wall mural proposals over a year period working with Lydia's House. It was an extensive process, and most of them had intricate floral designs, and I would imagine that if you went back through them and zoomed in every little area, you might see more flowers that kind of look like genitalia, because flowers kind of look like genitalia. It was not my intent, certainly not my intent, and if I could go back in time, I would absolutely make adjustments. But I don't think that pointing to my mural design is a valid argument for not painting murals. If we follow that logic through, one could argue that grocery stores shouldn't stock any produce because a banana or an eggplant might look phallic to someone and be seen as offensive. I don't think it makes any sense to let fear of a worst-case scenario keep us from participating in something that has so much potential to bring life to our neighborhood. Content aside, I also wanted to come here tonight to say, publicly clarify that Elizabeth and Sam Hatchett have nothing to do with this mural design. Elizabeth's studio did used to be in the building where the mural is proposed, and she's a personal friend of mine, but she's not designing or painting this mural. And they've taken enough heat on enough of the mural issues, so if people have issues with this mural design, I would ask that the Norwood community reaches out to me directly. I can make my contact information public somehow. I don't know how to do that. And then lastly, I did just want to say that I've been hearing the rumors about my design for months, and I've sort of avoided joining the conversation because I've seen it grow increasingly polarized and toxic, and I haven't really wanted to get involved. And I just wanted to take a moment to remind everybody on both sides that every single person involved in this debate is a person, and that at the end of all of this, we're all still going to be neighbors. I think it's important to stand up for what we believe in and engage in conflict, but it's hard to argue that any of us are really fighting for the betterment of all Norwood when we revert to name-calling and character assassination. It did not feel good for me personally to wake up one morning to find text that a piece of my artwork had been dubbed the Flying Penis Mural and that it had been linked in a public letter to counsel to sexual harassment. I pray that as we move forward in this conversation, we can look around and see ourselves and the image of God in one another. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next request to address council, David Thompson.
Hi, my name is David Thompson. I live at 4228 Ivanhoe, proud Ward 1 resident, where I think a lot of the conversation around murals has been happening. As I've watched this discussion and been a part of this discussion about murals moving forward over the last couple of months, and especially though after I watched the last council meeting that was about 3 hours, I got the feeling that we may be in danger of losing sight of the big picture, losing the forest for the trees. So I just wanted to take a moment to kind of remind council and remind folks of a couple of things. First of all, I think that, you hear a lot. I appreciate all the public input. There's a couple pieces of data that kind of show that there's pretty overwhelming support in general for murals and for public art. I think that you know that the U.S. playing card redevelopment, they did a survey of what people would like to see as part of that redevelopment. 350 Norwood residents, and 83% of the people mentioned murals or other public art as something that they wanted to see in the development. Only 21 people said they did not want art in the development at all. A second thing that you may or may not be aware of is there's competing change.org petitions online right now. And again, for what it's worth, there's 500 people who have signed the petition supporting murals in Norwood. There's 119 as of this afternoon who do not want murals in Norwood. So again, I'm sure that we've all heard from people on both sides. I think I haven't seen any data that says anything other than, in general, Norwood is supportive of murals. And that doesn't mean that every citizen likes murals, and that's okay. Different people like different things. And it's not council's job to make sure that no one is offended by anything and that everyone's tastes are provided. So, for example, I don't love large inflatable Halloween decorations. That's okay. I live in a neighborhood, I live in a community. Sometimes you see it, you move on. It's fine. And I think that part of living in a mixed use, mixed income community is that I don't get to control everything in my environment. And that's okay. And I think that, we shouldn't pretend that Norwood is a bedroom community off of 275 where you have to drive 10 minutes to get to a commercial space. Part of what I love about Norwood is that in 5 minutes, I can go to the post office, I can go to the library, I can go to Gordo's, I can go to the Quick Pick. And that is part of what is great about Norwood, is that it is this diverse place that has a lot of things going on, a lot of different uses happening. And I think that it's okay for us to embrace that and to be the best version of what Norwood was built to be, rather than trying to be something that we're not. And what I would say is that the types of communities that are like Norwood, most of them have already embraced some form of public art. The last thing I would just want to say is I hope that we don't get stuck asking the question, what if something bad happens? You can ask that question about any proposal. What if murals start flaking the paint off? We have that issue now. What if somebody tags a mural with graffiti? We can walk around and show you graffiti. That's not a reason not to do something. And I would challenge us that it's just as important to ask, what if something really good happens? What if Norwood becomes more desirable and a more beautiful place because we're able to move forward with something like this? So in closing, my fear is that we spend so much time trying to figure out ways from stopping somebody from theoretically painting something offensive on a wall, that we end up stopping or discouraging somebody like Jerry, who's actually just trying to paint sunflowers. And I don't think that's something that we want to be against. So thanks for your work on this. I know that it's been a lot. I know that it's been a lot of controversy, but I hope that we're able to continue to move this forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Next request to address council, Vicki Gary.
Hello, my name is Vicki Gary. I live at 2242 Cameron Avenue. I'm a 27-year resident of Norwood and have been a licensed attorney in good standing in the state of Ohio for the past 33, almost 34 years. I am here to express my serious concerns about the constitutionality of both Ordinance A and B if they are passed, if either one is passed. I couldn't agree more with our city's law director, Mr. Moore, that whenever a municipality restricts speech, it may be opening itself to a legal challenge. It is my opinion that neither Ordinance A nor B will withstand a legal challenge that asserts a violation of the First Amendment. What is a mural? Your definition is that it is a non-commercial painting or artwork temporarily or permanently affixed to the exterior of a building wall, freestanding wall, or a fence, which can be seen from the public right-of-way. The city has no problem with paint being permanently affixed to the exterior of a building or fence. It's only when that paint becomes a work of art, a design, that the city has a problem and wants to either regulate or prohibit that paint. That is a communicative, that is the communicative content of the non-commercial painting or artwork that is trying to be regulated, that you're trying to regulate. According to the Supreme Court case of Reed versus Gilbert, regulating the content of the medium makes the ordinance content-based and subject to strict scrutiny review. So what are your compelling reasons? You've provided two. You've said aesthetics, you've said traffic. When it comes to traffic, you're concerned that there could be an accident because somebody's looking at a mural, and therefore we can't have any murals because of that. A real easy remedy would be to put a sign before a mural that says something to the effect of be careful, mural ahead. You could do something like that and murals could be allowed and not restricted for traffic reasons. Aesthetics, it's just a buzzword. What you're trying to do is limit them because you have concerns that they're going to be ugly, they're going to be bad taste, they're going to be offensive. Well, guess what? The First Amendment allows people to express themselves in ways that other people find offensive, ugly, bad taste. The Supreme Court has said in a case, there was a case called Supreme Court case of City of Ladue versus Galileo, and I would ask that all of you take a look at that case. The The woman wanted to put a sign in her yard. It wasn't allowed because the city of Ladue only allowed 10 types of signs, and they didn't allow yard signs at all. And so the court came out and said that although the city had a valid interest in minimizing visual clutter, it has almost completely foreclosed an important and distinct medium of expression. That's what you're doing. When you are restricting murals, you are restricting a medium, and the medium is the message when it comes to murals. People want to express him or herself with a mural on their property. The court went on in Ladue and said that the home has long been part of our culture and our law, and that therefore we have to be very careful when you're trying to restrict someone's right to use their property when they're trying to speak. So I ask you, what's going to be next? What medium are you going to go after next? What artwork? I can go and I can buy, I looked up today, I can buy a 58-inch statue of David in all of his glory. Now, Mr. Geraci wouldn't like it because he would be in all of his glory. But that would be my right. So if you say, oh no, well, we're not going to have statues in residential areas, no, because that would be offensive. There'd be nudity. Then you got to get rid of St. Francis and the Virgin Mary, because they're statues also. So I know that's ridiculous, but I'm trying to prove a point, which is people have the right to express themselves. You go ahead, you restrict that right, you're going to be sued, the city's going to be sued, we're going to have to pay a hefty amount in damages and legal fees. I don't like my money being spent on lawyers for something that shouldn't have to be spent on. We shouldn't be having to pay legal fees. We shouldn't have to be paying damages, because I'm telling you right now, it's not going to be upheld. So I ask that you do the right thing, allow murals all through Norwood, and take a look at that case that I cited, because the court did say that people do look at themselves, and they in municipalities.
Thank you, Mrs. Gary.
Thank you.
Our next request to address council, Jerry Hoff.
Good evening. I'm Jerry Hoff. Thank you very much for letting me speak. I took the liberty of making copies of the little email I sent out to all of the council members yesterday, and then I've also included some photos that I just took this evening, and I apologize for the poor quality. It's a black and white printer. But I also included a map that shows the location of my building, the location of the murals, and the orange highlighted area is the space in which this mural could be viewed from. So here's my little spiel. For months, I've been part of the conversation about murals in general, and the sunflower mural in particular, that I started painting on the south side of my building, and I'm waiting for permission to be able to finish painting that mural. Like you, I've listened to the plan for a professionally designed and installed mural for Lydia's house, and heard of the hopes and plans of other people for installing murals around Norwood. I'm here to discuss a really specific thing, though, and that is, I was shocked to hear that there was a text change. I had the impression that things were going along, and I got a real sense, as the gentleman earlier said, 80% of the people that he's interviewed are in favor of this. And I got the sense that this was really the direction we were going in. So I was really shocked when I heard that Councilman Mike Gabbard, just a few minutes before the last council meeting, had brought in a text change to the proposed ordinance that specifically restricted murals in neighborhood business districts, which is exactly where my building is located. And what I'm trying to show in that map and with the photos is what the people who are going to see that mural are in and out of the post office parking lot, in and out of the car wash, in and out of the Maristop and the laundromat. It's a neighborhood business district, but it's very much a business district. So I'd like to ask you to please fix this. I understand that there's an A version and a B version. The A version is allowing murals generally in Norwood, and the B version, I've been told, is the one that would specifically restrict it in my area and other areas that are in the neighborhood business district. So please consider allowing murals throughout Norwood, but especially in the neighborhood business district. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you. Our next request to address council, Juliana Thompson.
Hello. My name is Julie Thompson. I live at 4228 Ivanhoe Avenue. I'm really grateful for the adjustment in the agenda where the award was given before we got to speak, because it just made me pause and think, wow, these police officers saved the person's life, and I'm here feeling all these butterflies over a mural. I'm really grateful that you guys shifted that so that I could pause and be grateful that there are bigger things happening. So I guess I would just say that lives are being saved. That's fabulous. And this is a mural. It is small. But it seems like it has tapped into bigger things for people that possibly are projections of bigger scenarios, bigger problems, bigger feelings. But alas, here we are. Murals are on the table. Let's talk about them. I've spoken here before. I've already stated my opinion. I'm personally an artist. I think murals everywhere would be fabulous. I get the process. I understand that it's baby steps. I'm proud that we're here. I'm proud that we're even entertaining this idea. Change is hard. I think I've said that before. Things that are comfortable and known are very easy to stick with and to settle into. Fear stirs up things that maybe people aren't proud of. Anyway, I say art everywhere. I say you guys and ma'am are doing a good job. All this stuff is public. People are watching all of this. We can do hard things. Thank you.
Thank you. Next request to address council, Nathan Wint and Holly Johnson.
Good evening, Council. I'm Father Nathan Went. I live at 3844 Victory Parkway, which is on the campus of Xavier University, which borders Norwood. At the university, my role is to work with faculty and academic departments to engage the community in academic courses, so curricular experiences to have students get out into the neighborhood as part of their academic learning, applying real-time knowledge and getting to know especially our neighbors surrounding the university like Norwood. And I connected with Holly Johnson, who works in the education department at Xavier, and we have been embarking on finding avenues to engage Xavier students more with our neighbors. And that takes time and a process of showing up, listening, getting to know who our neighbors are, and hopefully that our students can make a positive impact in the communities and take a lot away with them in their growth as young people and aspiring leaders and growing into the people that they want to be. I connected with Mary C. Miller of Norwood Together, who shares a little office space in the Alumni Center, where my office is in the Eigel Center for Community Engaged Learning. And I said, we're working on engaging students more. I know we got some stuff going on in Norwood, good people there. Many of our students live in houses when they're students at the University of Norwood. But how can we deepen our relationship and make a more positive impact for our students and our neighbors of Norwood. And Mary recommended many things through some conversations, and also mentioned Pastor Sonny James, that he was doing some critical work in the community here in Norwood about racial reconciliation, healing, justice, and that has a great appeal to me personally, and also I know that really can make an impact and touch our students too. So, but primarily, we want to listen. We want to listen and to experience, and if we can, utilize some of our resources to help in that process for our students, especially for youth, and for any racial reconciliation, healing that would be happening in the city of Norwood.
Holly Johnson. I am a professor at Xavier University. I'm a teacher of teachers. I teach about 100 pre-service teachers. My students are 100% white students. Until we can create economic inclusion, our school is going to continue to produce white teachers who end up going to teach in the suburbs because they don't have the necessary cultural responsiveness needed to teach a class with multicultures. I'm working with Pastor Sonny and Sister Kirsten to provide my students with opportunities to, for the first time, some of them for the first time, to have conversations with people of other colors. My students are having life-changing experiences. They have to journal, they have to reflect. I'm in tears reading these reflections, thinking, we're on to something, we're doing something, we're changing something. We need more teachers of color. We know the statistics. We know that our students of color go to the office, get less office referrals with teachers of color. We need that. And until we get economic inclusion, I'm worried that we aren't going to have that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next request to address council, Pastor Sonny James.
Good evening, Pastor Sonny James, 1830 Hopkins Avenue in beautiful, wonderful Norwood, Ohio. Let me first start off by just saying, because of the families that have been struggling with COVID-19, it is important that all of us as citizens do our part to make sure that we get tested. So I'm very proud and excited to announce that my recent COVID test, yay, came back just the way we wanted. So to all of our neighbors, God bless you, be safe and be healthy, and we pray safety for you and your families. I want to thank all of our firefighters, our police officers who diligently seek to serve the residents of this community. I want to make sure that you all hear the words that come out of my mouth. When I stand before you and I make challenges, it is not my desire to make challenges just to be a pain. It is my desire to make challenges that really will impact the lives of people that need it most. I'm embarking upon a work with many of my colleagues right now in Norwood. And it's very challenging because we have some awesome leaders in this community. I don't care what you think you hear from me. You hear this and hear it clearly. If crime comes to my community, you don't have to worry about calling the police. If they're busy, call me, because I'm not going to have it. I want every resident in my neighborhood to be safe. I want every child to have an opportunity to grow up with the same opportunities that I've had. And I'm so honored that recently, when we talk about economic inclusion, It really is the cornerstone because it addresses the mindset of the systemic racism that has plagued our community for decades. I know it's difficult to talk about tough things, but guys, I'm so confident. And recently meeting with President of Council and Councilman DiNardo and Councilman Gabbard. I'm so excited because I can, for the first time in Norwood's history as I've seen it, people are coming to the table to really embrace the difference in each person. I'm going to show you what challenge looks like. This wonderful resident to my right, Mr. Hall. Beautiful character, beautiful human being, loves this community like none other. I would call him brother. At the same time, we've got to level the playing field from the top to the bottom to where what one person can do, we open the door for others. So no matter what position we are on issues, I'm so pleased to say we're going to begin to address economic inclusion and diversity. And it's important that each of you be heard in that arena. And I'm so proud that I can stand and at the end of the day, my 8-year-old daughter, Sunny Renee, can say, Daddy, you're doing good work. Keep it up. But I want to say to each of you, you are doing good work. Keep it up. But we've got to be bold enough to stand for the things that nobody else is going to address. I'm so proud of Mr. Kelch, who recently reached out to me and sent some employment opportunities. And I cannot tell you how excited those individuals were to feel like they were at the front of the line for the first time and not the back. Not to be given a disingenuous effort of a job opportunity. Guys, on January the 15th, that's a Friday, please mark it on your calendars. I don't see many pens moving. Thank you, Mr. Kelch. From 6 o'clock to 7, we're going to have a socially distancing march about equality and all of us coming together. And I encourage you all to put it on your agenda and come out with the other 1,000 people that are going to flood our streets. And you can flood it with them, or they can flood it with us. God bless you all. Be safe, be healthy, and love. Peace.
Thank you. Our last request to address council is Mike Weigel.
Thank you for giving me a chance to talk today. My name is Mike Weigel, representing 2016 Mills. I have about 100 apartments here in the Norwood area. I want to thank the council, especially the Housing Committee, for the months that they have worked on a new chronic nuisance ordinance that I understand is going to be up for vote tonight. Norwood has some properties that need to be addressed and problems need to be taken care of, and they need a little more strength in the rules and laws to do it. And this group worked tirelessly for months, and with my input, other landlords' input, apartment association, real estate investor association input, and came up with a new law that should help address all this. I am in favor of that. And it's fair to all parties, and it gives the city of Norwood another way to fight these nuisance properties, and it can result in a better quality of life for everyone in Norwood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Moving on to item I, reports of standing committees of council. Committee of the Whole report. Committee report, Committee of the Whole, date 10/6/20, to the Honorable Counsel of the City of Norwood, Ohio. We, your Committee of the Whole, to whom was referred Ad Posher, Tri-State Trails, Pastor James' 13-point plan, beg leave to submit the following report. Ken Black of Ad Posher made a presentation regarding transit, advertising, and the opportunity to generate income for the city. Council asked questions of Mr. Black, and the consensus of council was to send communication to the Safety Service Director to initiate discussions with Ad Posher. Wade Johnston and Rachel Cully of Tri-State Trails made a presentation to council of the Norwood Bike Parking Audit Map, Norwood Connector Concept Map, and a map of Greater Cincinnati trails and paths. Additionally, Tri-State Trails offered 20 to 25 bike racks at no cost to the city. Consensus to send communication to the Safety Service Director to work with Public Works. And item 3, Pastor Sonny James began discussing his 13-point plan, and those talks will continue. Respectfully submitted, Ken Miracle, Chairperson, Mr. Bonsall, Mr. Braden, Mr. DiNardo, Mr. Gabbard, Mr. Geraci, Mr. Kelch, and Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson.
Move to receive and file the report.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to receive and file. Mr. Braden.
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to Finance, Budget, and Audit Committee report, Mr. DiNardo.
Yes. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio, we, the Committee of Finance, Budget, and Audit, to whom was referred a third quarter financial review follow-up, TIFs, an education process, claims process, these are claims against the city, and RETA. The third quarter financial review had follow-up items which were addressed by Jim Stith and Chief Bill Kramer. Jim Stith then provided a financial summary as at September 30th, understanding that the lower expenses to our pacing expectations is due to COVID delays in the CARES Act covering many of our labor costs incurred. He also noted that there is currently $70,000 of, at that time, unencumbered expenses related to CARES funding that the administration is working with department heads to fully exhaust through safety and protection actions for its employees. He expected none of the funding to be returned to the state, or to the federal government. It is also agreed that our financial reviews should be held quarterly and will include a review of revenue reports, expense reports, and cash flows as was performed in this review, but also to add bank reconciliations, as this was particularly advised by the Ohio State auditors. Next, we looked at TIFs and education and next steps. The Port Authority and Attorney Patrick Woodside attended the meeting to give an overview of TIF financing and how the current and potential future TIFs impact our city. We discussed the details and merits of project TIFs versus TIF districts, and we also discussed the potential to refinance the Linden Point TIF and to extend the Rookwood Exchange TIF in the near term. I have asked some follow-up from our law department, another councilman, and the various speakers that attended at the meeting to have further discussions and recommendations to be provided at the next Finance Committee meeting. That date has not been set. Claims process. We attempted to cement our prior discussions around how council and administration should process claims against our city. The following process is recommended with a likely ordinance to be presented and voted on in the coming general council meeting. You'll see that on the agenda. A quarterly report of all claims in summary format is to continue to be presented to the Finance Committee in case there are other items to discuss further. The Law Department is given the authority to investigate and process any claim under $1,000, as they have demonstrated an ability to effectively protect the city while also maintaining a fair and reasonable approach to claimants. It is suggested that the Law Department be supported in this effort by other parts of the administration, potentially a triage type function, and that's in quotes, as it's simply a suggestion and hadn't been really laid out in any particular format. A triage type function for initially documenting claims as they come in. Lastly, we discussed RETA. We reviewed RETA's response to provide comparable costs and collections estimates with 8 benchmarking municipalities and other services that could be provided to our citizens. This committee would like to use this report out to formally recommend the following to the administration. It is the recommendation of the Finance Committee that the administration, specifically the mayor and treasurer, look to enter an agreement with Rita for collection and e-filing services for the next tax cycle. The committee also asked the administration to consider the duration of the initial agreement for services, as we prefer a short term, 1 to 2 years, to be contracted to. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the committee report be received and filed.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo. May I have a second? Mr. Braden, saw your hand.
Oh, yes, I'll second it. Thank you.
Second by Mr. Braden.
Thanks, guys.
Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll just say I think this is a fantastic Finance Committee meeting that we had. It was very helpful hearing about just the different opportunities that we might have with some of the bonds, and specifically one of the TIF districts in the city, to kind of prolong it to add additional value for the city. Just want to say that, yeah, I'm looking forward to working more on that, and hopefully the council will support some of these changes as they come along. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Item J, third reading of ordinances or resolutions. We don't have any this evening, so we'll move on to item K. Second reading of ordinances and resolutions. K1, ordinance establishing the Norwood Arts Board. Mr. Thompson.
I'll move we have the second reading of this ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to have the second reading of the ordinance. Mr. Bonzo.
I would like to second that.
Second by Mr. Bonzo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. May we have the second reading of the ordinance, Mrs. Williams?
Ordinance establishing the Norwood Arts Board.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Moving on to item K2, ordinance amending Chapter 1321 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances to allow murals in certain areas of the city of Norwood. A. Mr. Thompson.
I move we have the second reading of this ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to have the second reading of the ordinance. Mr. Bonzo.
I'd like to second that.
Second by Mr. Bonzo. Any discussion? Mr. Thompson.
Right, so we've discussed this at length, and we heard some good comment from some of the people in the audience tonight. This ordinance is the one that's a little bit broader than the other ordinance. It covers off on not only the small corner businesses within the residential areas of the city, also the neighborhood business districts that was edited out of the previous or the following ordinance last week. Already this is as Mrs. Gary pointed out, it's already a restrictive ordinance. It just happens to be less restrictive than the other one that we're offering. I also like to point out that this ordinance will allow at least 3 murals, I believe, that are intended, have been with us along this whole journey, that want to do this. Mr. Hoff, his mural, I believe Lydia's house is covered off in this, as well as the Hatchets, who have the studio, who has been talking. So this, there have been individuals who have been with us along the way and along this journey who have informed and helped this process along, and this is the ordinance that allows those things to move forward. If we go to the other ordinance, which we will be hearing after this one, that cuts out the residential, including the Norwood Business District, bring it into a tighter restriction on where murals can be. There's, we all have our reasons for one or the other. the valid reasons for one or the other. My preference is for this ordinance. I think it's better for the city. I think it's better for economic development in the long run. But I just wanted to one more thing. Mr. Thompson came and he talked about data about support of murals within the city. And I thought it was interesting because it's something we really haven't brought out, but it does echo what I found is about 80, just based on emails that I've gotten, communications I've gotten, it's been about 80-20, 84, 20 against. We're seeing that kind of data come through, and albeit not scientific polls, but polls nonetheless online, where people are, whether it's a Facebook poll or whether it's the petitions. That's the kind of swing you're seeing. So as polarizing as this issue may seem, it's not. It's just that we've got two very loud sides. One of them is actually not as broad as the other. But anyway, I just wanted to call that out, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Tracy.
All right, if we're going to bring up Mr. Thompson's 80-20, then I'll bring up my 80-20 against, because if we're not going to go with scientific numbers here, then I'm going to say that I've talked to about 80% of residents that don't want it. Okay, now, again, let's see. If this goes in residential areas, and I want to put a phallic-shaped mural on my house, you know, maybe an attorney can step up and tell me that my neighbor across the street who's trying to sell their house wants to sue me for putting that up on there because they can't sell their house. So, I don't know the answer. Maybe an attorney can bring it up because I don't have a law degree. So, it doesn't make a lot of sense to allow it in residential areas and allow people to just put whatever they want on their house, to be honest. And, you know, again, we don't have scientific numbers. I can sit here and say that I've spoke with 80%, probably more than that are against murals. Obviously, you, Mr. Thompson, you're going to get all the people that want murals. I'm going to get all the people that don't want murals, okay? That's just how it's going to be. You know, any supporter out there is going to get a bigger number than what they, you know, all numbers can be skewed in a way to advantage, okay? So whether we have an art board or not, the art board has no authority to say, that's not a mural, that's a mural. Art board just has power to suggest, oh, hey, that's a phallic shape. I don't think that should be put in there. The artist, however, can still put that in there because, again, the art board has no authority to say yay or nay. So I don't agree with the first ordinance. I'm still not going to agree with the first ordinance, so.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. I think I saw Mr. Bonsal's hand up.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I did have a chance to talk with Elizabeth Hatchett over the weekend, and she strongly wanted to emphasize and make sure that everybody knew that no matter what ordinance comes out of this council, that they are not going to do a mural at 1822 Hopkins. That they would love to see reconciliation between them and their neighbors. They are not going to antagonize, you know, them further by having a mural there, no matter what's passed. Now, that being said, that's not saying that they wouldn't have the right to put one up if we did pass Ordinance A. I'm just saying that they really wanted to communicate that is their complete intention is to have no mural. You know, I'm going to support Ordinance A. I do believe that it is. I believe it's the best ordinance for Norwood. You know, however, I know that not everybody agrees with that, but I just wanted to, you know, emphasize I am going to support Ordinance A, and I'm looking forward to voting for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsa. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify something Mr. Geraci said. None of these ordinances allow you to put a mural on your house. So nobody in a house across the street from anybody else is going to put any kind of material on a wall that's going to make them want to sue them because they can't sell their house. It's for businesses in certain districts within the city. Secondly, I have no doubt that you've been contacted by more people who don't want residences, just the same way that I've been contacted about more people who do, which is why I brought up the fact of the online things. The polls online and the petitions online still skew the other direction, slightly less biased, though, like I said, not scientific. It does not surprise me at all that you've heard from more negative, and that's why we're all here to hear from our constituents. So, and I completely respect you not wanting to support this ordinance as well.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Moving on to item,
Second reading.
oh, I'm sorry, second reading.
Ordinance amending Chapter 1321 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances to allow murals in certain areas of the city of Norwood.
Thank you, Mrs. Wood. Item K3, ordinance amending Chapter 1321 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances to allow murals in certain areas of the city of Norwood. B. Mr. Thompson.
Will we have the second reading of this ordinance?
Motion by Mr. Thompson, have the second reading. We have a second. Mr. Kelch?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Kelch. Discussion? Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. So at the last council meeting, I raised objections to the fact that when I arrived at that meeting, the ordinance language had been modified to take out neighborhood business districts. I don't know when it was modified or what the intention was behind it or what have you. I just know that I wasn't told about it and I didn't know about it until I arrived at that council meeting. At that council meeting, I was told that, I was wrong, that it was the intention all along that neighborhood business districts weren't included. Well, I've rewatched the meetings, the council meetings and the economic development meetings. I have studied what was said. I specifically asked if we're going to include neighborhood business district in the zoning, and it was said, well, it's a business district. In every version of the ordinances, neighborhood business district was included. At the September 8th council meeting, when talking about all of the changes that had to happen to the ordinance, it was never mentioned that neighborhood business district was going to come out. At the Economic Development Committee meeting the next week, we talked about many different changes. I specifically brought up neighborhood business district when talking about a specific building. And it was never mentioned that neighborhood business district was going to come out. It was always in both versions of the ordinance. That's where it was. I know that there were many residents that were concerned when the change was made, and especially concerned that essentially, after it was implied that basically that they're wrong, that wasn't the intention when it was all along. To me, it's also obvious that we did have multiple council members that either did not understand the zoning code or did not read a zoning map and did not know where the zones were and kind of what could be affected. But with that being said, it's water under the bridge. I'm not going to bring it back up. This ordinance B is better than no ordinance at all, and so I'm going to support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Mr. DiNardo.
It's worth mentioning that James and two other people recommended that I rewatch those meetings. I did, and I want to make sure that it's public that you're right. I did misinterpret the zoning laws. I did say one thing, and I intended another. So I assumed that B was trying to be more restrictive. I think I just didn't understand what neighborhood business district meant. So you're right. When I said that, no, that's what I meant all along. It's because I didn't understand neighborhood business district. And when you watch those videos, he's right. We didn't bring it up. So had to be said. I'm just trying to say you were correct.
Thank you, Mr. Donardo. Any further discussion? Mr. Gabbard?
I'll apologize for probably either miscommunication or just not understanding. My intent, when we started down this process, it was Ordinance A. And kind of as the descending person on the committee, I wanted to bring up another option. So we have, and so with that, I probably as well misunderstood exactly what that was. At the September 8th meeting, and I addressed this to Mr. Hoff in an email today that he obviously didn't get a chance to read before he came tonight. We had a council meeting on the 8th. On the 4th, when we received our packets, I noticed that the neighborhood was in Ordinance B. And I copied the email in that I'd sent to Mr. Moore. And believe me, this is not blame on the law department. The law department is extremely busy. And, things are going to happen. Mistakes are going to happen. So it was in there. But at the 8th meeting, we weren't going to vote on this. It was put back in committee. So then when it came back out for the 22nd on the 19th, after looking at the packets again, I noticed that it was still in there. And I sent Mr. Moore another one saying, hey, just to be clear, there's supposed to be no residential. And that was my intent. That's why I wanted to have the second ordinance, was there to be none. We have kind of two groups on this. I would kind of disagree with Mr. Thompson that it's become, because it has become polarizing, and that's unfortunate. It really is. But we have people that are for it and people that are against it. And I'm kind of trying to, in the middle, trying to say, okay, here's a compromise. Let's start with B, and then make sure that our process works, and then we can then revisit and see if the process is working, then look at expanding that. But it's at least a start, so we can get moving on this. And so that's kind of where we are, but apparently I misunderstood as well, and I apologize. I'm man enough to admit when I'm wrong, and look forward to, passing one of these at the next council meeting, and to be able to at least start on something, whether it's the full boat or the modified one. Like I said, I brought the modified one to be a compromise between those that were totally for it and those that are totally against any of it, to try to bring a compromise. And, we'll see how it goes down, I guess, next meeting, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. May we have a second reading, Mrs. Williams?
Ordinance amending Chapter 1321 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances to allow murals in certain areas of the city of Norwood.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Moving on to item L, introductory readings of ordinances and resolutions. L1, resolution accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor. Mr. DiNardo.
Yep, I'd like to make a motion that we have a first reading of this, but I would like to express my intent to discuss and then pass this on October 27th. So this is a motion for the first reading, but I would prefer if we didn't go 2 and then 3.
Motion by Mr. Nardo, had the first reading. Mr. Thompson.
I'll second that.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mr. Dracy?
I'd like to go through the chair to Mr. DiNardo. This is just housekeeping stuff, right? The stuff that the auditor needs every year?
I'll say yes, but I'd like to clarify that a little bit. Yes, in that, actually, I prepared a few bullets. I could just kind of explain what it is we're saying yes to. So this resolution is our city's agreement with Hamilton County on the rates and amounts calculated on the property tax levies already passed last year. So maybe that's what you mean when you say housekeeping. We are essentially agreeing with their calculations on the assessments so that they can pay Norwood our money. A couple of points for your packets. The M stood for millage, not millions, and is a unit utilized to calculate taxes assessed on real property. I think it is $1 of taxes as $1,000 of property. By passing this, we're authorizing Jim Stith to complete the process with the county auditor. This is not a new levy, and we are not approving any change. And this is, as you said, the same process that was passed last year. I could go on into what the two levies are, and then what we might see, because this is for 2021, what we might see for the next year. But we'll see that on the next council meeting if we would like to wait for that.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I just, this is something that we vote on every term.
Yes.
This comes up every
It
term,
seems so.
and so it's something that we're allowing to happen. And so I would be okay with the 3 readings to get this off the agenda, just so we could move on with other important things. So that's my opinion, but I'm going to support your one reading tonight, and then as long as we pass it the next reading. So, but I mean, I would say let's have all 3 readings and get this off the agenda and move on.
I mean, I know you.
But that, you don't have to, it's okay.
It's
okay.
due on the
We
first,
can be
okay,
different.
so it's kind of whatever. If no one really cares, we can do it all at once. I just wanted you guys to have the opportunity.
I'm just saying that it would be fine to pass all 3, to have all 3 readings, but that's okay if it doesn't, if 1 reading is fine with me. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Any further discussion? So a motion on the floor by Mr. DiNardo, second by Mr. Thompson, have the first reading. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have the first reading?
Resolution accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Moving on to item L2, ordinance enacting new chapter 567 of the Norwood codified ordinances entitled Chronic Nuisances and declaring an emergency. Mr. Dracy.
I'd like to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings, please.
Motion by Mr. Geraci to suspend the rules and have all 3 readings. May I have a second? Mr. Kelch.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion, gentlemen? Mr. Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. President. So here we have an ordinance that has been worked on for quite some time by especially Mr. Geraci with my assistance and then the rest of the Housing Committee. We've also spent a lot of time, as Mr. Weigel said earlier, working with landlords, renters associations, property associations. Pastor Sonny James was there giving some criticism, feedback, and helping shape this ordinance. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about it. I'm glad it's finally here, as I'm sure Mr. Geraci is as well. This ordinance has been kicked around, it's been looked at, it's been changed, it's been criticized. It's the Rocky Balboa of ordinances. I mean, it just keeps coming back, and now it's stronger than ever. I don't think I've seen an ordinance come through that's more complete, more cared for. We didn't submit it a couple meetings ago because it wasn't what we wanted. It wasn't what we talked about with the landlords, the property associations, the renter associations. And we didn't want to put something out that was not a quality ordinance, a quality product. We knew we were going to come in and we were asked for 3 readings and pass this thing. Because unlike some ordinances, this ordinance is very necessary for Norwood. It is most important. It is beyond clear to me since I sat in this seat that you have a nuisance property problem within the city of Norwood. And to me, this is a very, very good opportunity for all of us right here, right now, that if we care about Norwood, and we want to see Norwood move forward in a very good light, that we have the opportunity right now to have a bipartisan vote, put everything aside that we may have, and help Norwood, and help the residents of Norwood with this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Mr. Dracy?
I would love to thank Mr. Bonzel, Mr. Gabbard, and Mr. Kelch for going through the 6 grueling meetings that we had with this thing. They weren't some 1 hour, 2 hour meetings. There were a couple that lasted 3.5 plus hours, just over this one ordinance. And I'd also like to thank the law department for back and forth on making changes or making adjustments in order to make sure that we had this thing just right for the residents and for the city. This ordinance allows a task force of 5 personnel, including the health department, the police department, and our building department, take all the ordinances that they will go out and cite individually on these properties to cite it under one ordinance. And within this ordinance, we have a few processes that are unique. We're looking at having an appeals board that is filled, or that has 3 members of residents, not city employees, not council members, but residents. And those residents within this ordinance would have to apply to the city council, us, to become part of that board. And then we would discuss those applications or those resumes and go over and figure out who we would like to see on that board. I think this is big, especially up in the Worth Avenue area, possibly some areas down in Mr. Kelch's ward in Ward 1, where we've got those chronic problems. You know, those businesses or those homes that leave trash out in the front yard for 4 and 5 months. The businesses that allow their patrons to walk outside and just drop trash on the ground. I think this will be a wake-up call for a lot of people to try and clean up Norwood a little bit and bring Norwood into the 21st century. So I want to thank Mr. Bonzel, Mr. Gabbard, and Mr. Kelch for sticking this out and getting this ordinance written up. This has been a bear.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. So regarding the 3 readings, I know this is a big ordinance, but I am willing to support it. I'm fully prepared to vote on this tonight after, as Mr. Tracy alluded to, the 6 meetings that we had. We also have had it on a previous agenda, even though we didn't vote to do a reading, it at least got it out there that residents knew that that was coming as well. I think that while this is probably not perfect, I don't know whatever could be perfect. I think this is a good ordinance. I think it protects residents and protects our housing providers enough. And honestly, I think the city, while this does give them avenues, the city has to work at this too, because it takes, for some of these properties, it does take multiple violations to get there, which I think is good because it gives just some time so it's not overly burdensome. I will say that I do appreciate Mr. Mike Weigel that is here tonight that spoke. He has been instrumental in providing feedback from the perspective of a housing provider. I think without him being involved in it, this ordinance wouldn't be as good as it is today, and it wouldn't be as fair as this ordinance is today. And so for that, I thank you. And I just, again, Mr. Tracy's been excellent on this. He's really pushed us through. He's done a ton of work. And I know multiple residents that are struggling with properties that I think are going to eventually fall under this, and I think they're going to be very happy with the outcome. I did just want to note that this from my perspective, and I might be wrong, this is the first time that we've actually used civil penalties or civil fines for property kind of violations. And in the past, it's always been kind of criminal. We take people to court criminally, right, when their properties, when they violate some kind of code. And I think this is the start of something really good, because I think that trying to keep people out of court and keep people, not put a criminal record on people, but instead go after them in a more civil way, using civil fines and such, I think that's a better alternative. And I just want to say that I do hope that we look at other ordinances that we have out there and potentially look at having that civil fine option versus just going to a criminal court. So with that, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Any further discussion? Mr. Gabbard?
This has been a long, grueling thing, but very, very necessary. When I came into this, and when I first talked to Mr. Geraci about this, when he first brought the idea to me, my thought was about some of the businesses that we're having trouble with, especially in my neighborhood. And, other people looked at it, and Mr. Weigel was at every single meeting, and I thank him for being a part of the process as well. He looked at it as we were going after landlords. And really, it encompasses all of it. I guess it's just how you look at it. But this committee and this ordinance is an example of how things should run and be cordial and inclusive. We listened to Mike, we listened to Charles Tassett, we listened to Pastor Sonny, as they all brought ideas and said, hey, what about this, what about that? And we went back, and Mr. Geraci changed them, and we brought it back to the next committee meeting, and we worked through that. So this was a great example of how the process should work, and hopefully this will give us some teeth, along with the task force, to be able to start cracking down on properties, whether they're business properties or residential properties or rental properties, whatever, to be able to give the teeth that enforcement needs to be able to move forward and get some changes made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Mr. Thompson?
I just want to say I appreciate all the work and effort that's gone into this. You're correct, it is a big ordinance. It's got a lot in it. Just for tonight, I'm not going to be voting yes on the 3 readings. I would like to see this spread out, because it is the first time it's been in its complete form here tonight, and I don't know the residents have had a chance to see it, but I do support the ordinance, just not having 3 readings. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
No.
Mr. Braden?
No.
All members present, we have 5 yes, 2 no. So that, we need 6 votes to spend. Mr. Thompson, Mr. Bonsall.
I do appreciate the compliment, though. Yes, so I would like to make a motion that we have the first reading of this ordinance.
Mr. Gabbard.
Second that motion.
We have a motion by Mr. Bonsall to have the first reading, second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, motion passes. May we have the first reading?
Ordinance enacting new Chapter 567 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances entitled Chronic Nuisances and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Moving on to item L3, ordinance amending the Norwood Codified Ordinance, Section 133.01, to authorize the settlement of claims for damages against the city involving the payment of $1,000 or less. Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we have all 3 readings of this ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall to have all 3 readings. Mr. DiNardo?
I would second that.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzel?
Thank you, Mr. President. So this ordinance, we've actually been talking about this topic in the previous Finance Committee and this current Finance Committee, basically since our first meeting. And it all has to do with around the settlement of claims. So in the 1970s, an ordinance was passed, and it's in our codified ordinances, authorizing the auditor and the law director to be able to settle claims if they both deem it to be appropriate for the city, to be able to settle claims for an amount of up to $250. We've looked at the kind of inflation adjusted, what it should be today, and it's about $1,000. And so this is going to allow basically, when people have small claims that they would like the city to look at, I mean, it's basically going to allow people to get answers much quicker. The law director and the auditor are going to be able to make a joint decision, while protecting the city, but also making sure that, if there are legitimate things that happen, and there truly have been, where the city potentially could have been at fault. But it's going to allow them to make decisions and not have to burden Finance Committee with conducting a large investigation and Counsel with having to worry about it. And essentially, we'll get a report once a year or so, or more often, of just any claims that have been settled. And all of it's public record as well, if anybody wants to look that up. So just asking that we kind of get this through so that claims that could be settled potentially can be addressed, and we can move some of those forward.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all three readings?
Ordinance amending Norwood Codified Ordinance, Section 133.01, to authorize the settlement of claims for damages against the city involving the payment of $1,000 or less. Ordinance amending Norwood Codified Ordinance, Section 133.01, to authorize the settlement of claims for damages against the city involving the payment of $1,000 or less. Ordinance amending Norwood Codified Ordinance, Section 133.01, to authorize the settlement of claims for damages against the city involving the payment of $1,000 or less.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel to pass the ordinance. Mr. DiNardo?
Second, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Moving on to item L4, a resolution declaring the month of October 2020 to be Breast Cancer Awareness Month in the city of Norwood. Mr. Braden.
Motion to have all three readings, emergency clause.
We have a motion by Mr. Braden. Mr. Gabbard.
I'd like to second the motion, but I'd like to ask Mr. Braden if he wouldn't mind changing his motion to include all three readings with the first reading in its entirety.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, I would. Thank you very much. Absolutely.
So motion by Mr. Braden, have all three readings, the first in its entirety, second by Mr. Gabbard.
Yes.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Mrs. Williams.
A resolution declaring the month of October 2020 to be Breast Cancer Awareness Month in the city of Norwood, Ohio. Whereas this year, approximately 276,480 new cases of invasive breast cancer will be diagnosed in the United States, and roughly 42,170 people will die from this disease. And whereas in Ohio, an estimated 10,350 new cases will be diagnosed, and an estimated 1,710 people will die from this disease in 2020. And whereas having a mother, sister, or daughter with breast cancer almost doubles a woman's risk of contracting this disease. Women with a father or brother who have had breast cancer also have a higher risk of breast cancer. Overall, 15% of women with breast cancer have a family member with this disease. And whereas breast cancer is the second leading cause of cancer in women in the United States of America, in which only lung cancer kills more. And whereas the average risk of a woman in the United States developing breast cancer sometime in her life is 13% or a 1 in 8 chance. And whereas education about breast cancer and early detection strategies are critical to saving lives and protecting our families, the economic hardship it causes to families is huge. In 2010, the cost of treating breast cancer was $16.5 billion higher than any other type of cancer. This was expected to increase to $20.5 billion in 2020. And whereas there are more than 3.5 million breast cancer survivors in the United States, including women still receiving treatment, and whereas because all women and men are at risk of developing breast cancer, we encourage citizens of Norwood to recognize the importance of breast cancer screening now. Therefore, be it resolved by the City Council of Norwood, State of Ohio, that Section 1, the Council of the City of Norwood declares October 2020 to be Breast Cancer Awareness Month in Norwood, Ohio, to encourage our residents to learn about breast cancer, including the benefits of early detection and screening. A resolution declaring the month of October 2020 to be Breast Cancer Awareness Month in the City of Norwood, Ohio. A resolution declaring the month of October 2020 to be Breast Cancer Awareness Month in the City of Norwood, Ohio.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Gabbard.
I make a motion that we pass this wonderful resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Mr. Thompson.
Second that.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you very much. I was just curious, who brought up the resolution, or how did this come to our table? Okay, excellent. Well, I just want to thank you, Mr. Miracle, for this. So I do want to say that, I think one of the big fears of kind of, the shutdown with COVID is that people wouldn't get their regular screenings. People wouldn't see the doctor for the things that they really need to see the doctor about. Maybe people wouldn't move as, get out exercise as much because, there's fear. And hopefully, and this can just serve as a reminder to people to just, whatever screening that might be, whether, it is like recognizing here breast cancer screening or whatever, that to just, take care of yourself, make sure that, we get those done. There's people, I think that we all know that we've lost to breast cancer, including some very special people here in Norwood, and we could prevent that by just getting that reminder out there. I think that would be a good thing.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Brayton?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to item M, administrative reports. Mayor Schneider.
Thank you, President Miracle. A couple of different things going on. The streets are being repaved right now, Cathedral and Shanmore, and we will be starting Indian Mound and a couple of streets up in that area also here soon. It's interesting as you watch the process at how this is completed. It's a lengthy process, and I'd like to say that it happens overnight, but we all know that it doesn't. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the process. First of all, there's the whole bidding process. You guys have been involved in all the process of putting all the money together and putting all the documents together, and then we go out to bid, and then it has to come in from bid, and then we have pre-construction meetings once the contract is awarded. So all of that stuff has been done and gone through with City Hall. Pre-construction walkthrough, walking all these projects. Then the construction crew starts putting up signage and restricting where cars can be parked. All of that is just, the start of the chaos that happens in the neighborhood when all this happens. Milling of the street, which is the removing a layer of the asphalt, and then defining areas that need full depth restoration. And that's a big part of it also, figuring out, once you remove a level of that, you have to figure out if the base is good, and that can add cost to the project. So marking those repairs, working on those repairs. Then finally, they put on a leveling course. The leveling course is sort of a lot of people will call City Hall and say, this blacktop looks terrible. Well, they just put a leveling course on. That's not finished. So they have to go back out and they look at all the catch basins, all the sewer lids that are out in the middle, and they've got to adjust all of those up, which is going to be the final one. They also have to go through for all the stormwater stuff. So they're looking at the catch basins that are in place and what needs to be repaired. And they're looking at sidewalks, the corners, the transitions, changing them over to ADA compliant stuff. So that's an important aspect of it. So all of this is going on, hopefully while you're at work. You're not sitting out there watching them, because it's a lengthy, like I said, it takes a while. So then you get a final course on there, and this is where there's so much work that's been done. You get the final course. There's a final walkthrough that's done with the city, with the construction crew that's doing it. We basically tell them, here's our punch list. These things need to be taken care of. Maybe something wasn't done properly. We're trying to watch it as they do it, but ultimately there's always something that they have to finish. And then that's the completion of the project. I said that quickly, but we know that's months and months. We know that the Indian Mound project is going to be started this fall and won't be finished until the spring, and probably starting into summer, because it is a major project. We also know, looking at some of the paperwork that's coming out from Indian Mound, it's been such a long time up there, and the trees that are in the Devil Strip being that green space between the sidewalk and the curb, a lot of those trees are going to have to be removed, because they've already caused damage to the pavement, they've caused damage to the sidewalk, they've caused damage. So a lot of those, when you see that, it's not that we want to go through and take those trees out, it's a necessity for the investment that we're doing. So just keep that in mind. With the city services and what's going on, the fire truck, the ladder truck's fully in service now. I don't know if you've seen it out on the street, but they put some graphics on it. And actually, the one graphic on the back of it is a big N, and it's the block N, like the City of Norwood High School N. It looks really nice. I'm really pleased with how it turned out, and it's I think that vehicle is going to serve us well. The new ambulance is in the state, but it doesn't have the power cot that needs to be installed in it. So we'll be taking delivery of that soon, and then we've got a couple new police cruisers out there on the street right now. So those are some new pieces of equipment that you'll see out and about. COVID funds, we spent up every bit of the COVID funds that was allocated to us originally. The thing that happened here recently is they put out more funds. So there's another $700,000. But there's a little bit of a change with the $700,000. They've recognized that personnel costs can be covered under this stuff with council's approval. So what they're saying is, if your normal staff that you would have here is spending a full Saturday sanitizing the firehouse, and they wouldn't be doing that regularly, that part can be covered with COVID funds. If you have a health nurse that's spending a ton of time with skip tracing, with all this stuff, that can be covered under these funds. So we're looking at how to utilize that funding in the best way and making sure that we're meeting all of the requirements. But it changed it a little bit, and we're not in such a big rush to go out and try to figure out, the right places to spend this stuff. So we'll probably be coming to you later on, might be the next council meeting, another ordinance asking for council to say, okay, we understand how it works, and we approve this part of it too. And then the last part I'd like to say is, it's been beautiful these last few days. I was sitting out on my porch and I looked at the sunset red maple tree that I got planted. That was part of the Keep Norwood Cool and through Dana Bowl. And we've got some really beautiful trees that were planted, small trees that are going to make a huge impact and look beautiful in our neighborhood for our grandkids. Well, some of the trees I've planted look pretty darn good right now. All my trees were just little sticks in my yard, and they look great now. So plant a tree and not only enjoy it now, but make sure your kids and grandkids can enjoy it. So that's really all I had. for administrative report.
Any questions or comments to Mayor Schneider? Mr. Gabbard?
Just wanted to follow up. I know that when we first approved for Shanmore and Cathedral, I asked if curbs were going to be included, and he said they weren't sure at that time. It depended on the cost. Do you know if curbs are going to be included?
It depends on that full depth restoration that they've done, and I don't know how much of that restoration, how much they had to do. So that would be where we would end up doing some more curb work. So I'm not sure, Mike.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. Do we have an update on Elm Avenue? I know we've talked about some things and seems like things keep falling through and then there's a new idea and then it falls through. We give an update to those residents that are over there suffering consistently?
Yeah, the last part that the office was working on was that there was some federal funds that potentially we could tap into that for that. And that, of course, puts different hoops in place for us to jump through to make that happen. So actually, Councilman Kelch, I'd recommend that you call into the office and talk to the Safety Service Director about that on where we're at. Or I can have him email you where we're at.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Anyone else? Comments, questions? Thank you, Mayor Schneider.
Thank you.
Moving on to item N, unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business this evening? No unfinished business? Then we'll move on to item O, new business. Any new business this evening? Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, just wanted to say, I'm sure everyone is aware, we've got a big election going on right now, and we have a wonderful resource here in Norwood. We've got the Hamilton County Election Board right here. So if you're somebody who's requested an absentee ballot, you don't want to mail it in, we've got a drop box at the Board of Elections, easy to drop off. I also want to point out, if you do want to mail it in, check the paperwork that came with it. It will tell you how much postage you have to affix to your ballot to fill it in. A stamp won't do it usually. It's generally costs a little bit more to send it in. So we might want to make sure every vote gets counted. So if you're gonna mail it, make sure you do it in plenty of time and use correct postage. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, and I mean, as many residents have already experienced, you really just want to avoid Wall Street, frankly, as much as possible during the Board of Election business hours. There are some improvements that are being made, though, there when it comes to the traffic flow. I mean, they'd already made improvements by moving early voting to a separate part of the building, by really pushing people to the back to park. But because so many people are, worried whether their ballot's going to make it or not, many people are driving their ballots to the Board of Elections and putting them in the box. But unfortunately, there are so many people that it's just causing backup. So the Board of Election actually leased space across from Wall Street, I think in Grand Central Station. And they're going to be taking the absentee ballots over there as well to try to kind of dilute some of that traffic. So, they are trying to make improvements and trying to be, I think, good neighbors to Norwood residents. And I think this is just an unprecedented year. It's the first presidential election for them. Plus, it's an election that many people on all sides are very excited about. And so, long story short, just be patient with them, and I'd like to recommend just avoiding that area.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Any other new business? Mr. Gabbard?
At the last Committee of the Whole, we had Pastor Sonny James come to start with his 13-point plan for economic inclusion. And because we had other presentations, we only got about 20 minutes into that. So thinking about that this week, I really think and would like to make a motion that we place into Law and Ordinance Committee to amend our standing council rules and form a new committee called Diversity Inclusion. And that committee would be just like the committee of a whole. It would include all of us, because I think we all need to be involved. Our rules state that it needs to go through, any changes need to go through the Law and Ordinance Committee, and that's why I ask it to be placed in there. And so my thought on that would be that we have it every other month, and then the other months we have committee of a whole. That way we're not inundating everybody with that. So like, you know, odd months we have committee of a whole, even months we have diversity inclusion. With that, I think that we are at the beginning of a major change in Norwood. And we need to make sure that Norwood is inclusive for all. This committee is not the Sonny James committee, but Sonny James has championed and pushed for us to start thinking about this and to start the conversation. And so this committee, I would recommend that this committee, we start with Pastor James and the Black community, and we work through his 13-point plan. And then we invite the Hispanic community in to find out how we can be more inclusive for them. And the Asian community and the gay community and females and any other group that feels like they are not included in Norwood, in the progression of Norwood, that we meet with them. And we start these conversations to change Norwood to be more inclusive. And so I'd like to make that motion that we place into, that we would amend the standing council rules to form a new committee called Diversity Inclusion, and that be placed into committee of a whole. I guess I don't have to make a motion to place that in committee of a whole. I mean, not committee of a whole, into law and ordinance. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mr.
Well, I don't
Mayor.
think we need a motion on that, do we? Not to just to place it in the committee. Okay.
Not under new business.
Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just kind of wanted to comment, if I could, on the previous recommendation there. I mean, I think as a Law and Ordinance Committee member, I mean, sure, I will be happy to address that, participate in that discussion. I would like to say, though, I mean, so whether it was 20 minutes or 30 minutes, I don't know. I thought it was closer to 30, but I very well could be wrong. I mean, next time that I just would like to ask, when we have things like this come to our committee, I'd like to, what do we actually want council or the committee to do? Because, we didn't have any real action items coming out of that. It was basically just kind of a lecture. And that's okay. It's just, I think if we want to take action, we really need to make sure that, if we're going to, I mean, we all are very busy people. I've got an 18-month at home that I would much rather be spending time with than being at meetings here, frankly, when possible. Now, there's very important things going on here, Keith, but I'm just saying, I want to make sure that our time is used wisely. And so I just would ask, no matter kind of what happens on this, when we do have things that come up, let's let council know what you actually want from them, because we didn't have any action items that really came out of that when we could have. We could have, with 30 minutes, we very much could have reviewed something and had some action items come out. So just keep that in mind as we move forward with this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Mr. DiNardo.
Yeah. Thanks. So I do understand your feeling that first, that it was difficult to see a tangible thing that you wanted, tangible action. I would say whether it be 30 minutes or 3 hours, we're trying to figure out what those tangible actions are. I think that meetings 1 through X are really going to be doing just that, defining the outcomes that we want to see, and then more importantly, defining the steps and metrics to get to those outcomes. So I would say that starting the committee, initiating the committee, is the step number 1. That is the action. Secondly, I promise that I hear you, because I have a kid exactly the same age as you. I know that this is another meeting for us. and many of us have a ton. But it is really important, and I would say essential actually, that all 7 of us are on it, on this. Because it's just like a lot of other initiatives that you see happening in the corporate environment, in our government bodies. You're seeing this need to have an all buy-in community position. And that position is we need to be doing something to address diversity gaps and inclusion gaps. So it's just a comment that, you know, I took away from that 30-minute talk to try to say, and I wrote these down, agenda section of the committee would be leadership and employment opportunities. An agenda section could be community projects and outreach, basically giving a platform, well said by the way, to a lot of different organizations that feel like they don't have a voice here, or they don't feel comfortable coming to this podium at a general council meeting. And then the third topic could be funding opportunities. I think the point being through all this kind of like rambling and notes and things like that is right now they're just that, notes. And I think we can have meeting number 1, maybe meeting number 2, meeting number 3, and then over time, they start to be something very tangible. And over time, we start to see new faces. So maybe eventually you don't ever need to see me or Sonny or whoever. You just start to see someone that we've never seen before because we're seeing the same 90 faces representing the entire city. And that's probably not good math.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Kelch.
Yeah, just first off, want to respond to something I heard that was pretty ignorant. I mean, I have kids myself. I have 3 of them. Rarely anymore do I really get to see them in the evenings. A lot. We came into this position knowing that we were going to have to work a lot. So if for anybody that would rather be anywhere else, I'd say resign so we can pick somebody else that wants to be there. Long story short. Secondly, I would like to thank Mike Gabbard for that idea. I think it's phenomenal. I would love to be a part of that with you. I think it sucks I'm not on that committee because I would love to be a part of that. But anything I can do, let me know.
We're all
The Law and Ordinances Committee.
Oh.
Talk about it further, but anything I can do, help, let me know. But I think it's a great idea.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Mr. Bonson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, there was no point to that committee, the 30 minutes of that committee of the whole. There was nothing that came out of that. We were lectured at for 30 minutes. So, you know, I don't want to be lectured at by another council member for wanting to spend time with my family instead of be lectured at. And I'd also say, I think instead of the entire council, I think we should see who wants to be on this committee and put them on this committee. If not everybody wants to be on the committee, I don't think we have to have everybody on it. There's times that we do work where one committee does work and brings it back, just like with the chronic nuisance ordinance. And very important ordinance, very important work, but we didn't have to all be there to get it made up. So I would just recommend that we, like I said, when the Law and Ordinance Committee looks at it, that we put the council members that want to be on it. And if there's council members that support what's going on, but don't necessarily want to be at every meeting, then we don't put them on it.
Thank you, Mr. Bonson. Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I just, real quick comments here. I appreciate your comments, Mr. Bonzo, and I tend to agree with exactly what you said. And I personally don't, and also, you know, just to respond to Mr. Gabbard's statement, and I respect and I honor that statement. I personally already feel that I am a public servant of every one of those groups that you named. And every one of those groups I represent at this seat. So I don't feel the need. I think we already have that. If you're asking me, I'm a big proponent of being efficient in government. And I think that the bureaucracy is that we want to have more meetings, but we already have that. It's called the Committee of the Whole. And if we want to have economic inclusion, which I am for, 100%. We can put it in the Committee of the Whole. We can walk through it there. We already have that type of committee. So that's my response to that. So I can appreciate all the responses tonight. And I am already a servant of all of those communities here today.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Mr. Tracy.
I I've heard a lot of responses. I've heard a lot of, hey, let's spend some family time. Most of you know what's going on with me. Most of you know, some of the people in the audience know what's going on with me and how much I have going on. If I have to attend another meeting, then I have to attend another meeting. There may be some meetings I don't make, and that may just happen. But I do think that if this is something that we are looking to do, we can go into the Law and Ordinance Committee and discuss it and discuss amending the standing rules. And again, if I am completely bogged down, you know, probably a lot more than most of the council members here. And trust me, I understand that there needs to be time for personal life, and there needs to be time for family and school and work and everything else that's going on in somebody's life. Can I give up an extra 2 hours a month? Maybe. I don't know until it comes up, but, you know, I think it needs to be at least discussed. And as soon as I can find a time for a Law and Ordinance meeting, I will call one, and hopefully next meeting I'll come up with a couple dates.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. DiNardo.
I just wanted to reemphasize, but also throw to the particular committee, that it is to me personally very important that all 7 of us be a part of it. If at a minimum, to signal a particular message to our city, at a maximum, because I think that there's going to be a lot of cool things that you guys can all bring to the table. And if it's less than 7, I think we'd be missing out. My second point to make sure that the meeting considers, or that committee considers, is that it's, I promise you, not the Sonny James show, if that is a concern. He was the person who started this. He was a loud voice. He was the first voice, and he will continue to be someone that is part of the initial talks. But eventually, after, I don't know, months, maybe even it takes a year, I hope it's new faces. So please do not let maybe a conflict with a person get in the way of the need for his message to still be something that we put part of this.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Any other new business? Mr. Bonzel?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'd like to refer to the Law and Ordinance Committee, basically just letters that council receives, maybe putting some additional feedback in for the clerk of council. Right now, the rules of council basically says that the clerk of council, it's their direction about which communications get added to the agenda and not, and that council by a majority vote can choose to add or remove items. So the clerk of council has certainly done her job. I think, though, that the precedent's now been set that, you know, and people know that if you send a letter to the clerk of council, that it's going to get added to the agenda or potentially get added to the agenda. And I think when we have future hot button topics, we potentially are going to get, you know, 5, 10, 15 letters that could take us an hour and a half to read, especially when we get the letters in our packet and we can read them before the council meeting. So I would just like to refer to Law and Ordinance Committee, just considerations on which letters do get read at council meetings and which letters get added to the agenda but are received and filed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Any other new business? Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to put it out there to the Parks, Recreation, and Public Space Committee members, a reminder we do have our regular scheduled. We're going to meet in council.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Mr. Gabbard?
I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to place into parks the Tri-State Trails to, you know, just start that conversation of looking at what we can do as far as walking, biking, hiking trails like that throughout Norwood.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Anyone else? Mr. Bonzel?
Thank you, Mr. President. So just wanted to let residents know that the Norwood Historic Home Tour, I think this is the second year for it. It is going to be happening this Saturday from 2 to 6 p.m. They're not going inside people's houses. It's going to be outdoor walking tour of the presidential district. I've already seen the tour guides out being trained. I've seen the last couple of days. I've seen them out walking around with people basically going on the tour themselves so they can kind of lead the tour. And there's a lot of people working really hard on this. I will say, though, because we're just a couple days away, that they're pretty much sold out, though. They've got 3 tickets left. So essentially there are, and I don't remember the exact time, but you can find it if you just Google Norwood Historic Home Tour 2020. There'll be a link that comes up. But just want to thank everybody that's working on that, and my wife and I are looking forward to attending. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Any other new business? Thank you. Move on to communications. Communications P1, letter from Mayor Schneider.
Letter dated October 5th of 2020 to Ken Miracle, President, members of Norwood City Council regarding Mayor's Court fines. Dear President and members of Council, enclosed, please find the report for Norwood Mayor's Court for the month of September 2020. Should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Victor Schneider, Mayor, City of Norwood.
Mr. Braden.
Motion for the letter to receive and file, please.
Thank you. Motion by Mr. Braden to receive and file the letter. Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Any questions? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item P2, letter from Jim Stith, Auditor.
Letter dated October 2nd, 2020, to the Norwood City Council. Dear council members, this letter is to let you know that September monthly financial reports were emailed to each council member on October 2nd. If you have not received said email, please let me know so that I can verify your email address and also get you a copy of the reports. Sincerely, Kelly Brown, Account Clerk, Auditor's Office.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Braden.
Motion to receive and file.
Motion by Mr. Braden to receive and file. Mr. Thompson?
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson to receive and file. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item P3, letter from Mike Kiefer.
Dear members of Norwood City Council, I'm writing you today in regards to the behavior of the executive assistant to the mayor, Mr. Tom Perry. As you can all remember, the Norwood City Council voted and approved this new position within Norwood. It's my understanding that this position must remain neutral when it comes to interactions with city leaders, residents, and potential nonprofits and developers. It has been brought to my attention that this is not occurring. Instead of representing us in a civilized and non-biased manner, Mr. Perry has harassed me and my children to the point that my oldest daughter is now scared and fears for stalking through social media. This past weekend, I was notified that Mr. Perry had been posting untrue comments about me and my family on social media, mainly Facebook. I sent Mr. Perry a message asking him to stop, and what I got back was filthy, nasty, and slandering comments. I have also sent a copy to each of you in regards to what was said to me and the ill wishes towards my daughter, her school, and Mr. Perry even went as far as calling me unchristian. While I will never know how Mr. Perry found out where my 17-year-old minor child attends school, it is concerning that he went as far as finding out, and it should concern you as well. Is this the best we can do, the best person for the job? When council approves such a position, council has the duty to make sure the office in which it created is doing their job fairly. Considering Mr. Perry's strong ties to Norwood together, the only nonprofit listed on the city's page, I ask, is he representing us all? Does he have all residents' well-being at the top of his list, or is he an implant merely here to push one group's agenda while attempting to pathetically bully others? This reminds me of the dark Huckbine ages when the mayor wasn't around, his appointed officials ridiculed, slandered, and outcasted all those that disagreed the slightest. Look, I know I am a spark plug politically here in Norwood, but for Mr. Perry took his frustrations out of my kid rather than me. That should be enough to scare anyone, including all of you. What would you do had this been your kid? Mayor, you not only interviewed this guy, but hired him. It's time to rein in your appointed person. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Tracy.
I'd like to make a motion to accept and file.
Motion by Mr. Tracy, receive and file. Mr. Thompson?
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mr. Tracy?
I would like to mention that this was sent to council and everybody a month and some days ago. We've gone through 2 meetings now without having this read out loud when it was believed that it would be read out loud. So I just wanted to make you aware of that.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
No.
All members present, we have 6 yeses, 1 no. Motion passes. Item 4, we have letters to council regarding murals. Mr. DiNardo?
I'd like to make a motion that we receive and file them as read.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to receive and file as read. May I have a second? Mr. Thompson?
I would second that if we could maybe let us know the number of letters and whether they were for or against the situation.
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Count them.
I counted 12, Mr. Thompson. Mrs. Williams?
Oh, sorry, I'm still counting here.
You counted 12?
And maybe I
Okay.
did it again.
And I think there were like 2, but I think I have to skim and figure. If that's the question, then I think I got to go through and figure out if it's 2 or 3 that were against.
I don't know that you have to, I'm just wondering if the clerk can, as when file, can let us know
I see
what we've got here.
Got it. Cool.
For public record.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
So,
Cool.
I just meant if you were okay to be okay with it.
so is a second, Mr. Thompson?
Yes, second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Bonzo?
I am absolutely against this motion. I think that we've had multiple meetings now where people submitted letters. We've had the letters read. I think the letters should be read. And if we want to change the rules of council to let people know that we're not going to be reading them or it's not going to be standard practice, then that's that. But I think everybody should have the equal opportunity to have their letters read, and I think that we should read these letters. So I will be voting no on this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Mr. Gabbard?
I believe at the last council meeting when I submitted the Economic Development Committee report that I submitted several, both for and against, all the emails that I'd gotten, which was several, both for and against, and we didn't read any of those. So.
Anyone else? Mr. Bonzo?
Yeah, many of those letters are here. And I think there are letters here that are against murals, and I got one right here in my hand. So I'm pretty sure that all the letters that were submitted that I know of by Mr. Gabbard are included here, and I think that we should read them.
Anyone else? Mr. DiNardo?
I can appreciate that, Tim. I suppose it's worth the explaining kind of why I raised the motion, just to put color behind it. I kind of felt at this point I've we, and the public have heard a lot of people actually speaking. I think one meeting had 19 people, and they're all valuable. I think at this point, though, a lot of the names that I saw were actually in attendance, or I've seen them, and so I don't know if we're getting any new information. However, you make a good point that we kind of cherry-picked in previous meetings, which probably wasn't the best thing to do. If it's important to you guys out of principle that they get read, I suppose it is.
So I'm sorry, Mr. Nardo.
I'd like to keep the motion, but we'll see how everyone feel. I just wanted to explain kind of why I put the motion out there.
Mr. Thompson?
I'm actually going to withdraw my second based on what Mr. Bonsall said. I think he's right.
Okay. Mr. Braden?
I don't mind seconding Mr. DiNardo's, I can do without hearing all the letters. We've heard from both sides over and over and over again, and due to efficiency, I can do without hearing the letters. So I'll pick up the second if that's something that I can do. I'll second Mr. DiNardo.
Mr. Thompson has rescinded his second, and you're adding your second, Mr. Braden?
Yes, thank you.
I saw Mr. Kelch's hand up.
I was going to second.
Any further discussion, gentlemen? Please call the roll.
Can you just remind the council members what the motion is?
Well, the motion by Mr. DiNardo was to receive and file as if read the letters that we received, and we have a second by Mr. Braden. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
No.
Mr. Gabbard?
No.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
No.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 yeses, 3 nos. Motion passes. Item P5 is a petition to prevent murals. Mr. Braden?
I'd like to make a motion that we receive and file the letter, please.
Motion by Mr. Braden. Mr. Kelch? Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Mr. President. Out of principle, I am going to vote kind of no on this motion. However, I can understand, since we did not read the other ones, that I can understand why people would vote yes on this to not read each individual name on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
No.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
No.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting, we have 5 yeses, 2 no. Motion passes. Moving on to item P6, letter from Planning Commission of Lexington Avenue at Montgomery Road.
Are we going to read the letter? You need a motion to receive and file.
Oh, it was just a little bit behind. I can,
Okay, good.
give me a break, John.
I'm sorry, Ms. Williams, I apologize.
To City Council from Planning Commission dated October 8th, 2020, and regarding Volkswagen Automobile Dealership on the south side of Lexington Avenue at Montgomery Road. On October 7th, 2020, the Norwood Planning Commission held a public hearing reviewing Peter A. Saba and Thomas E. Tepe Jr., representing Pond Realty Company, submitting Peter A. Saba, submitting both the preliminary and final plans for a planned unit development of 3.35 acres for the proposed removal of requirements as set forth in Section 3 of Ordinance 28-2014 and Chapter 1155, seeking to modify and remove the prohibited uses set forth in Section 2B, Automotive Service and Repair, and Section 2H, Sale of New Motor Vehicles in Ordinance 28-2014. For property located on the southeast corner of Montgomery Road and Lexington Avenue, addresses including real property identified on the Hamilton County Auditor's website as parcels Montgomery Road, 651-0054-130 and 131, 3732 Montgomery Road, parcel number 651-0057-0053, and 54 Montgomery Road, parcel number 651-0054-132, and a portion of parcel number 651-0057-0055, 0056, 0057, 0058, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, and 68, only for a Volkswagen automobile dealership. Planning Commission voted to allow the amendment of the application to add sections 2A and 2E. Planning Commission also voted to pass the PUD application on to Council for further review. Per Section 1155.14 of Norwood Zoning Code, the recommendations of the Planning Commission are to be forwarded to the Norwood City Council for public hearings and final action. It is requested that a public hearing be set no earlier than 30 days from the receipt of this memorandum.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would make a motion that we receive and file and refer this to the Economic Development Committee. I think that there's a lot of discussion that needs to be had, discussion that didn't happen at the Planning Commission meeting when it comes to the requirements of the current ordinance, why that was put in place, and just whether this would actually be the best use, since this is not just approving the PUD plan, it's actually modifying the zoning to allow it. So, like I said, my motion is to refer this to the Economic Development Committee and receive and file this.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo.
I'll make a second.
Second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion?
Mr. President?
Mr. Moore?
If I could, because I'm unclear reading this, and I'll direct this to the mayor. I have no authority to do that, so I'm going to fall on your mercy. I'm unsure, the Planning Commission approved the PUD, the preliminary and final PUD application, and recommended changing the ordinance. Is that correct?
The Planning Commission approved the PUD with the amendments that it came to the Planning Commission with. So amending the ordinance?
To allow those uses?
Yes.
Okay. And the reason I ask is because it just says that we approved the amendment of the application, which to me read that they allowed them to add those two sections to their PUD application and then refer it to council. So I just wanted to clarify that.
It was amended and approved.
Okay, and I would also mention that council could still, or the president of council can still schedule the public hearing within that 30-day, or that 30-day period out while the Economic Development Committee is considering it, if the president of council wants to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Okay.
Who had it? Mr. Nardo?
Yeah, it's mostly on, are we going to get like a letter from what the Planning Commission approved? Do they provide kind of they just say, I recommend, or is there, I'm imagining like a memo or the reasons why we approved it. Is that going to come to us, or maybe, I don't know, Gabby, would we see something like that before we talked about it? It'd be good to get their, not just the approval, but maybe like a summary of the things that they considered.
Is that a question for?
Yeah, it's a question for anyone who's been through this process before.
Okay. Mr. Mayor? I sit on the Planning Committee, or Planning Commission. So, but I'm the only elected official on there. All the other people are appointees. So my intention and what I saw through this was to get this in front of City Council, so that City Council, the elected officials, can make a decision on what they want to do in this situation. I think going into committee is probably the best place for it to go, where they can look at it and then bring it back out to council floor. And then the elected people for the city of Norwood can make a decision instead of a couple of appointed people making a decision to stop or not go forward. I think it's important because there's a substantial amount of money that this property owner put into it. And I think that it's only fair for it to see sort of the light of day out here in front of council, in front of the community. Planning Commission meetings aren't really well attended, and they're not really recognized as the place for public discussion as a council meeting is.
Got to do a follow-up, but you might answer it, so. I think the ordinance does talk about zoning, and so that's what would be changed. Would the BZA see this before us or after? You're shaking your head. Maybe you can answer.
Yeah, the BZA won't see any of this because it is a planned unit development district. So basically, the reason why we have PUDs is so that, Planning Commission can thoroughly look at something and, make the best decision about whether, okay, well, that setback doesn't have to be exactly there, or that doesn't have to be that. But essentially the development should be, good for the city. So it won't see BZA just because it's in a PUD. And the PUD plan is really the approval. Appreciate that. So, I guess my comments on this is that, I was at the Planning Commission meeting. I was disappointed at the lack of discussion about anything to do with the site plan when it comes to sidewalks or setbacks or anything like we would see, like any other planning commission would do. And I don't know if there was a staff report. There was no staff member that's a professional staff member at the meeting when it comes to trained in like city planning kind of issues. Carrie Town, who is the secretary at the building department, it wasn't the building commissioner, it wasn't Greg Oroz, it wasn't Greg doesn't work for the city anymore, of course, but it wasn't anybody that actually could help communicate and understand planning decisions. And frankly, people, you might think that, these kind of decisions should be taken lightly, economic development, but these are things that are going to last. This thing's going to be there 50 years, and we need to make sure that the plan is done right. And so I would just push back on the narrative that, we just need to get it out to the elected officials, because really it's the Planning Commission that should be doing the work to make sure that this fits in with the neighborhood, fits in with the walkable, pedestrian kind of oriented city that we're really trying to create. And then with the recommendations that, or the stipulations that get put on the plan right before it comes to council, it provides for a better plan than just sending it to council with no stipulations and allowing us to have to figure out what we may or may not want to add. So I would just recommend that for future projects that the Planning Commission take a much deeper look at these things and really make sure that the project is the best for the city. And furthermore, I don't think that somebody's investment, just because they buy a property and they invested money into it, doesn't entitle them to build whatever they want into the city. We had people that on Cortland Avenue that vaccine people that bought the old Norwood Baptist Church building, and they wanted to put offices or whatever else they wanted to put in there. They had all kinds of uses, and the Planning Commission last year rightly said no, because it wasn't going to be a good fit for the neighborhood, and it violated the current zoning that was there. And so and we as this council actually voted to confirm that, right? When we took over, I'm pretty sure the ordinance came to us on one of our first meetings. So again, just want to emphasize that I'm really looking forward to the discussion in the Economic Development Committee. I think it's going to be a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Anyone else? Cool. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting aye. Motion passes. All members are present, so we'll move on to item R, adjournment. Mr. Braden.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Mr. Braden. May I have a second? Mr. Thompson.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonsall?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting aye. We are adjourned.